Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. That's me, Lloyd Auerbach. Wow, the chat's been already active. That's pretty amazing, and I'm really happy to see that. So I'm going to just jump right in and start talking about or answering some of these questions or making some comments here. So, Brian, I know about Chris French's book. I wasn't aware that it was going to be delving into Julie Beichel's work. Taking a look at that, I was not a surprise. I'm assuming that book, which will be coming out in a few months, will be looking at the research of a number of different people in the field. I don't know. I mean, Julie Beischel, along with other folks, have written papers about her research, and those papers would have been peer reviewed. So I don't know if their assessments, I don't recall any place that there is a public assessment of those experiments with the mediums. I could be wrong, but I don't remember seeing anything in particular. But I would not be surprised if French basically disagrees with the interpretation. Let's just put it that way. He's certainly not someone to support the idea of survival of bodily death. Be interesting to see what he does, but I have not. I'll have to look and see, or maybe ask. I'll probably have to ask Julie Beischel if anybody's done any sort of public assessment, but I can't recall seeing that in any of the journals. Caitlin, there are good and dangerous people. Ever run into a ghost that used to be a dangerous person? Do dangerous people generally not turn into ghosts? Now, that's a really interesting question. And a number of years ago, on an e-group I belong to called SurvivalNet, many of my colleagues, that question actually came up. And a couple of people who knew the history, Carlos Alvarado knew the history of apparitional experiences and such. Others knew the old literature as well. And the answer was that truly dangerous people, like murderers, with only a couple of examples that are exceptions, and there's a reason why they seem to have been exceptions, they don't stick around as ghosts. They don't stick around as apparitions after their death. However, those exceptions apparently were a couple of cases where the ghost, in one instance, protested his innocence, and another was able to give enough information that his innocence was proven after death. So not really murderers. First one might have been. I will say that people who are bullies, I wouldn't call them dangerous the way we think of dangerous, but people who are bullies or a-holes, if you pardon the expression, do seem to occasionally stick around after death, and people might consider them harmful, maybe not dangerous the way we think of it. Then the other question, any information about ESP regarding time of death of a relative? Do you mean a prediction of a specific time of death? I know people have ESP sensations or have perceptions when someone they know dies without seeing an apparition. But as far as the actual predicting exact time of death, I don't recall seeing anything outside of television on that, but I could be wrong on that. And then shared death from a distance. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I don't want to misinterpret that. Hi, Dave. Let's see. How common or not are cases of multiple apparitions seen in a single instance? I guess it depends on how you look at the cases sometimes, because there are plenty of instances of people, witnesses seeing multiple figures, but those likely, based on the description, are probably place memory hauntings, residual haunting type things. Hard to know in historical records because mostly the people observed, they didn't try to interact, so we don't know if that was multiple people interacting or reacting to them at all. I don't think it's that common, typically outside of pop culture. Certainly there are places like the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum, and there are a few other places around the world where there is more than one apparition, but it tends to be fairly infrequent, which kind of makes sense to me. There has to be a reason why they'd all stick around at that time in the same place for that. Okay, and Caitlin, just feel free to jump in on that. Share death from a distance at some point. All right, let's see here. Debbie, do you have any medium events coming up? I do. well, I'll be working with a medium, but it's going to be in Oregon. The one we've got on the calendar right now, I will be speaking at the Oregon Ghost Conference. I'm going to be there March 22nd through 24th. I'll be speaking with a medium by the name of Ankasha Amenti on Friday night, followed by my Professor Paranormal Psychic Mind Theater. I'll be doing my mentalism show that night. So that's March 22nd. On the 23rd, Ankasha and I are actually doing a spoon bending party at the conference. And then she'll be doing her gallery reading that night, and I'll be kind of joining her a little bit on that. Nothing local. And the only other thing I have on the calendar right now in the Bay Area is another Forever Family Foundation grief retreat, which will be the weekend of October, I'm going to say the 18th through 19th and 20th. So that's this year. That's going to be in Milpitas. I don't believe it's been announced on the website yet. So you might want to check the foreverfamilyfoundation.org website. When it gets announced, it will probably fill up pretty quickly because it typically does. All right. Caitlin, what is the music for your intros? So a friend of mine years ago, another fellow magician who was also a musician, created that spooky music for me, that kind of organ type music, as an intro to a lecture that I was doing. So we could put that up on the web. It's actually on my other YouTube channel, youtube.com/Prof Paranormal, not instead of Ask Professor Paranormal, but it's kind of cool music. And hi, Patrick. And here we go, everybody. Good to see everybody else here. Let's see here. Let's move on down. Have you read Jacob Glazer's book, Paranormal Ruptures? I actually just got it in the mail, so I have not had a chance to really go through it yet, Paul. Let's see. The idea of innocent accused murderers sticking around to prove their innocence. Yeah, you know, if you had to have unfinished business, that would be a good reason to have unfinished business. Dying because of a crime or as a result of being executed and actually being found, just having information that can prove your innocence at that point afterwards. Multiple apparitions at some mass grave for Civil War soldiers. You know, this is the issue, whether those were actually apparitions or whether we're seeing a little bit of place memory in some way. The Gettysburg battlefield has many witnesses from the original TV shoot of Ted Turner's Gettysburg miniseries in the 1980s. And back in the 1980s, this was back actually when we still had our graduate parapsychology program at JFK University. I got a call from a guy who was one of the extras there. He was a Civil War reenactor, one of many. In fact, Turner's folks brought in a huge number of Civil War reenactors to literally reenact the Battle of Gettysburg. They've been doing it already, so let's do it on TV. They actually got to camp out on the battlefield, which is something that they could not have done without that kind of intervention. And this guy had talked to a number of extras and some of the actors because he and some of his buddies, when they were, for whatever reason, woke up in the middle of the night, sometimes just go to the porta potty, they would see Civil War soldiers marching through their tents. They would hear cannon fire in the background. And at first they thought they were seeing ghosts, apparitions, except that the soldiers repeated the same thing over and over again and didn't react to them at all. And they realized they were seeing a capture in time of the actual battle itself. So that was a case where they saw multiple figures, but they were not conscious entities. That's a little tough. Again, there has to be interaction for us to know whether or not we're really dealing with apparitions, conscious entities, or we're dealing with that kind of place memory, which is much more common. Tina, you're good if heinous baddies don't come back to say hi. I would agree with that. It just doesn't seem to happen. Yeah, if you've seen the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze, of course, the bad guys get taken down to the underworld by these shadowy figures. I don't know that that's true. That was very much a dramatic bit of movie mania for that, the writer did. But it may be something psychological about the folks who die who were, you know, bad in life or sociopaths or psychopaths that they can't stick around for whatever reason. All right. Mew, in reincarnation cases, at least one person who killed his fiance came back. That, you know, that's a different kind of situation. And that's something that is very different than the typical apparitional experiences that we deal with. Now, what's interesting about the kids who remember previous lives and some of the common factors, and there are exceptions to all of them, is that for the most part, the previous personality of these kids died tragically or suddenly or violently rather than in their sleep. So there may be some part of that is involved there. Confederate mound at Oak Woods Cemetery, Chicago, Illinois. Several people have said that it's massively haunted. Again, I'd wonder just what it's haunted by and whether we're dealing with conscious apparitions, which is possible. I mean, it's possible some of those guys went back to their grave. It's pretty rare for an actual cemetery to have conscious apparitions. But, with 4,000 people buried there, sure. And Debbie, I'll try to tag you on a flyer, something on my Facebook page. Have you seen the show Closer to the Truth? If you're talking about the old, I think it was a PBS show many, many years ago. I did see it many years ago, but I could not tell you, Paul, whether I remember what was the content for that. If there's a newer version of that, I haven't heard of it. I didn't realize that. You also Turkish bandit who killed and robbed came back as a baker. Yeah, there may be something very different rules, so to speak, that apply for reincarnation. And again, we don't really know what's going on in reincarnation, so it's a little tougher for us to kind of put that kind of pattern to things. Pete, thank you, Pete, for letting me know that. So there may still be places for people at the Forever Family Foundation's October Grief Retreat. So if you go to foreverfamilyfoundation.org and look at the events, you'll see that. Pete has told us that the Grief Retreat is listed now. And I don't know if there are spaces. We limit typically to around 50 people, 50 attendees. And we try to give priority to people who've lost a loved one recently, because this really is about their situation as well. Okay. You like the irony regarding the bank robber? Well, who knows what he was, when he was alive? Was he a baker who became a bank robber? Maybe he came back as a baker. Hopefully won't become another bank robber in that sense. All right, let's see. Cat, let's see. Oakwoods Mound may be a case of remnants. Yeah, just, cemeteries are an odd thing. The idea of somebody wanting to go back and stick around where their body is pretty odd in itself. I can't imagine that as a good afterlife for anybody, or even a good experience of being around because you're not going to run into people other than people who are either, in this case, curiosity seekers or grieving people in the cemetery, or looky-loos here and there. So we don't see really good reasons why cemeteries might be haunted, unless maybe it's a caretaker who's was working at the place and just decided to stick around and look after it. It's really hard to tell. But there's an awful lot of place memory, of residual stuff, psychic imprints in cemeteries, mostly emotional. They can feel very, very negative or creepy or sad because of the people, because of the mourning that went on there. Okay. Let's see, Paul, these are new episodes, the host interviews. Okay. I was not aware of that, Paul. I'll have to kind of see if I can find it. See what I can. Graveyard Grug, a bake robber. Yeah, there you go. That's good. Cemeteries in Hawaii have paranormal phenomena. Maybe it would be cultural. There is no question about that. One of the interesting things, if you remember the Amityville Horror, the book stated, Jay Anson stated, apparently from research he had done, that the home was built on top of an Indian graveyard, a burial site, the Shinnecock Indians. It was not. That was actually untrue. The Shinnecock Indians were nowhere near there, and there were no native activity that would have indicated a grave site. There's really no reason why a home built or a building built on top of a grave site should have any more activity than a home built anywhere else, because there are so many places in so many cities where so many people have died, violently sometimes, under where they're buried or they're under the buildings. That's why there's urban archaeology, for that matter. Um, so those places aren't haunted. There'd have to be an attachment of some kind from someone else at that point. Remnants, thank you. Yeah, place memory is the kind of the term that we like to use here as well. Anyone here in the chat like to become a ghost after death to have fun or annoy people? Well, okay, when I die, which I am not in no hurry to be there, but when I die, in my mind, I know I'm going to travel a little bit around the world, but I'm going to do my best to really annoy the true pseudo skeptics. I really want to just kind of needle them a little bit. But then I have some other plans. So I do plan on having fun and doing some other things too. Any new interviews? I got a couple new interviews. I'm going to be doing an interview. See, the problem is I don't know which ones are live and which ones aren't, but I'm scheduled for a few interviews coming up. The one I've got next weekend, I'll have to look this one up here real quick. But I've got one next weekend at, I think around, I'll have to take a look at the timing on this. So next Sunday, I'm going to be on one called Legal Paranormal from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific. So that would be 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. So that's on the 10th. That's one I've got scheduled. I got a few others coming up as well. I'd have to kind of pull them down. And a lot of times, most of the ones that I do tend to be pre-recorded. So I don't actually know necessarily when they're going to launch the recording. But I'll be doing some other ones as well. Have not heard of Jeff Mara's podcast at all. That's one that has not approached me or I've not heard of. So as well. Okay, Tina, when my younger sister said, I wish you were dead, I'd say, great, I'll come back to haunt you. Yeah, that's a good thing to say to somebody who says, I wish you were dead. You could say something like, you'll be sorry because I'll come back to haunt you. To see how they react. All right. Paul, thanks for being here. Curious about a parapsychological opinion of the onslaught of political psychics on YouTube. Are there more important issues for psychics? Yes, I'd say so. But that gets clicks. That gets watches. It's kind of a form of clickbait in some respects, especially in this political climate, people making predictions. But, if you're making a prediction about the presidential election, boy, at this point, it's a really bad 50-50 choice. And the odds are somebody's going to be right. So is that psychic? There has to be more to it than that. And I think that they would be better served looking at other issues or looking at other things than doing predictions on that. And the reality is that, predicting the future is, especially this far off with so many possible influences, like predicting the weather. Try predicting the weather a month in advance. I mean, it's bad enough that the weather folks, the meteorologists can't even predict it 3 days in advance sometimes. With all the data and models and computer analysis they have, it's going to be interesting to see how artificial intelligence gets applied to weather prediction and whether that's going to make any difference. But, when it comes to politics, there's so many moving parts right now. I'd say that anybody who tries to predict it today should go back and look a week from now and see if their predictions have changed, because the future, as Yoda would say, is always in motion. But it's a good way for people to get kind of clicks and things. I want to throw something out to everybody. I don't know how many of you have been playing with things like ChatGPT or Google Gemini. It used to be called Bard. But I've been playing with it for fun, certainly not for research purposes, mainly because, as you might have heard, if you have not, most of the generative AI can hallucinate or will hallucinate sources and content. And if you ask them for the sources, they'll give you sources, and those sources are going to be often not real. And then if you ask, and this has happened to lawyers, where they asked, is that case a real case? And ChatGPT came back and said, yes, it's real. because these systems are set up to fill in whatever you ask for. It's pretty rare for them to come back and say, I can't answer that question. And once they fill in with whatever, they're also designed to be confident in their responses. So the reason I bring this up, I was just talking to my producer on this before, is I've been playing with it a little bit in a different way. And just because of creativity, I've talked to some other people about this. There's the free ChatGPT if you don't feel like spending the $20 a month for the better ones. And some of the other ones have free trials and such. You can ask it to write a ghost story. You can actually tell it, here are the elements of the ghost story, write the ghost story for me. I actually asked for one, the ghost story I asked it to write, which was it was a short ghost story, is write a ghost story about a college student who got caught writing a paper with generative AI. And it generated a nice 1.5-page little story. You can actually ask for limericks about something or poems. You can ask for songs. So you can ask for a ghost story to be written in the form of a Taylor Swift song. And there's enough information out there that it can actually kind of play with that and come up with things. So I mention this because if folks would play around with the elements of a ghost story, put in like a paragraph of what you think the ghost story should be about, and then have it generated on ChatGPT, send it to me. Send it to askprofparanormal@gmail.com or just simply profparanormal@gmail.com, and maybe I'll read the best ones in the coming weeks. So I thought that that would be kind of a fun thing. I actually asked for another one, and I'll tell you the prompt right now. Write a ghost story in which a family dealing with a ghost of the previous owner is appearing to them and telling them to leave the house. They bring in a parapsychologist and spirit medium to deal with the ghost, but he won't leave. They use rap music to annoy the ghost enough so he leaves. Replace the parapsychologist's name with Lloyd Auerbach and replace the spirit medium's name with Annette Martin. Came up with a nice little story, only a little bit off of what we would be doing, but it was kind of funny. So, yeah, and we can post the best ones on the screen as well, so we can kind of go through it. But I'm happy to do a dramatic reading of some of those in some respects. So you can play with this quite a bit, and that's fun. So if you're looking for something fun to do, of course, the GPTs as well. So Debbie says you did a song in 90s music. Pretty cute. Yeah. It's fun to take a topic and have it generate a song in different genres and see how they differ. I've done different poems with that same prompt, the AI prompt, for a college student who was not supposed to use generative AI, but did it anyway and got caught. And I did a general poem. I did a poem in the style of, I wanted an Earth, Wind, and Fire song, and then I wanted limericks as well. All right. Paul, yes, I did. I have not had a chance to watch it. In fact, I'm really behind on grading my students. I have a couple of my students are here. It's just been, I was away last weekend. It'll be probably a while before I get a chance to watch that at this point. Deborah, the topic was you. That's cool. My way of testing the AI when they were first launched, by the way, was to say, who was Lloyd Auerbach? And I'm really happy to say that Google Bard finally learned who I was, and finally figured out that I didn't have 2 kids and I didn't grow up in Chicago. It took a while. ChatGPT sort of did okay, got a few things wrong. A couple of the others did very, very well. All right. I'm going to jump to Kat's comment first, Dave. Playing with the generative AI is madness. Gemini said the word for leap year was an old Scottish woman who invented the custom of women proposing to men on leap year. It probably, if it's cited National Geographic as source, you have to look at the source. Kind of like Wikipedia. With Wikipedia, you need to verify the sources are real. And most of the time in Wikipedia, the sources are real, but the stuff that's written is not necessarily real, especially when we're talking about alternative health or the paranormal or UFOs or anything like that. The guerrilla skeptics are a group of skeptics have become really powerful editors on there. So you always need to look at the sources or ask for sources otherwise. Dave, can you comment on this very recent quote from Chris French? There are literally hundreds of psychological effects that are 100% replicable. Nothing is 100% replicable. That is that's an oversimplification. No psychology effect is 100% replicable. Maybe with the same individual, you can get the same response. But if you're running across people, that is not true. That is not human. So maybe he's not using humans. I don't know. And Chris knows parapsychology. He came out of the Kessler unit at the University of Edinburgh, but he, like Richard Wiseman, are incredibly they're incredibly, I can't even say skeptical, doubting, beyond doubting. Okay, let's see. Let's see what else. So, so back to the AI thing, I'll just tell you, it's fun to play with. It is madness. You will get weirdness from them. You will get often inaccuracies. But it's kind of fun to play with it anyway, especially if you know the response, know the answer, and can ask for it in a different form. Just know, very important, don't put anything in any public AI that is proprietary to yourself. If don't necessarily, upload, certainly don't put any personal information in there, because it'll be shared, it'll be used in other ways. That's really just a general good thing to know about for anything on the web, typically. So very, very different than what it used to be, unfortunately, the way things used to be. And by the way, you may or may not know this, but AI, not generative AI, which is the new thing, but artificial intelligence has been used for decades, really for a really long time. So it's just something called extractive AI. It's a different kind of AI altogether. Hal makes me very wary of any kind of AI. That is true. And yes, AI can be scary like Skynet. We have to worry about things like that, I guess. There are other things to worry about, like people using misinformation or bad information. So I think that's more the problem. So if you think about this, much of the AI uses the internet, the whole internet, as its base, as where it's pulling from. And there's so much misinformation on the internet that we get bad information from generative AI. That only makes sense. But there are AI products out there, and I'm actually going to be looking into doing something with some parapsychological stuff based on something I learned last week. It may be possible to take some of the material that's already been scanned and made into text in parapsychology and apply AI directly to that and only that, which would come up with different, more limited responses. So that's an important thing that I see that as the future. That's the one thing that is really interesting in working for a company right now that has a legal AI where it uses the large language models, and it's actually using more than one, but it's only applying it to actual cases and code sections, the laws, and some limited materials. So the response is they've been trying to get it to hallucinate. And I think so far they've not been able to get it to hallucinate. Sometimes because the way the prompt is phrased, it misses the boat, but it's not made anything up because it's pulling from material that exists and is quality information. Not necessarily unbiased, because the courts are not necessarily unbiased, but it is something interesting there. Caitlin, you're trying to find a good system of fact-checking AI while using it for brainstorming, but not getting infected with bad information has been a challenge. Yeah, that is really the problem. You're better off with a good search engine. There is one called u.com, which does provide sources. And then there is Perplexity. I was just told about. It's an app. I loaded on my phone, in fact, as they were talking about it last week. And then again, that also provides the sources. So you want anything that'll actually give you sources, which you can then check. So it's always important to check the sources. That's the thing. But that might actually help. Could you retell the story about Alex Tannis with a couple who died at the same house but cannot meet each other, and Alex reunited them? I cannot. I'd have to look into some of Alex's stuff to remember that well. So I don't want to misremember that or tell it wrong. So I'd have to really look at that one again. Hey, Tony, good to see you here. Yeah, tomorrow night, for those of you who don't know, I am starting a course looking at equipment, technology, and ghost hunting, focusing on everything from the EVP and ghost box stuff to photography, SLS cameras, just all sorts of detection devices, and also the history of technology within investigations and how you have to look at that. Also in the class, we'll be talking about people as technology. So if anybody's interested, you can sign up for that class. It's a 4-week class. It is at the Rhine Center, or it's an online course. For those of you who don't know, I teach online courses through the Rhine Education Center. You can just go to rhine.org and click on the education tab, or you can go to rhine.edu. Excuse me, rhine.edu, one word, .org. So rhineedu.org. And the class is listed there. It's a little late to join our other classes, but it's definitely plenty of time. You can join usually up to the second week. It's a 4-week class. You can take it for credit towards one of our certificate programs. You can take it just for fun. The lectures are recorded and are up the next day. So even if you can't attend live, you can still watch it and participate in the class in other ways. The class in survival is coming in May, the class on evidence for survival. It's called Human Consciousness and Survival of Bodily Death. That is happening, I think, the first week of May, but maybe the second week, because I'm going to be way towards the end of that first week. So I'm pretty sure it's the first week of May we're going to be restarting. So, which would actually be, yeah, it may not be May 1st. It'll probably be the following week. And then I'll also be teaching a class in May, starting in May, on parapsychology and anthropology, looking kind of at other cultures and their beliefs in psychic stuff. And then a 4-week class sometime in there on developing your intuition, which is really about developing ESP. So all of that'll be happening in the spring session for us as well. Just a reminder that my paranormal casebook is out in paperback. I have been so swamped with too many things to actually put it in the Kindle format, right format for Kindle. That is coming soon, though. Hopefully, now that I finished my taxes today, I can start working on that, get that done this coming week, and also catch up on grading my students who are actually taking my courses for a grade. Mr. Review, glad to hear you're learning a lot. That's the most important thing. People have asked me what I've specialized in over the years, and I like to always put myself forth as an educator first. Yes, I've specialized in investigations, and that is instead of laboratory work, because I find that too repetitive. Talk about repetition or replication. Do you offer your Atlantic University course every semester? It's just once a year. It is, but the Rhine Center has an introduction to parapsychology class that covers most of the same information. It's just in a different form and with not as much information, because that is a graduate school course for Atlantic University. So that's different. There are no graduate programs in parapsychology in the United States. There are graduate programs in the United Kingdom, in England and Scotland, and you can even get a PhD in psychology with a specialization in parapsychology from the University of Edinburgh's Kessler unit in parapsychology. That the University of Edinburgh has actually produced, I think, the majority of PhDs that have come into the field, at least in the Western world, in the last probably 40 years, for the most part. So definitely a good place to look. And sadly, the U.S. how do I put this? The academic attitudes are not open to parapsychology and a lot of other subjects for a number of reasons, one of which is the kind of seeds that have grown into major roots that the skeptics have laid since the 1970s, to the point where at many universities there are people who, unless they're quite brave and already have tenure, have been careful about even expressing any interest, or certainly having had any experiences in psychic experiences, because they get ostracized by colleagues in their department. They might lose some courses. There's a number of things that can happen. I do know from personal experience that sometimes there can be, even trying to get a course going can be difficult in a particular department, because very often university, community college departments have a limited number of courses they can offer because of budget concerns. In fact, I ran into this way back in the early 80s at Westchester Community College in New York, where I was warned when putting in a course, which was not, it had to be approved by the social science department, but it was an adult ed course. So it was kind of weird that it was not even for credit. But I was warned by the head of social science that there were going to be a couple people in the meeting where I presented the course, two professors who were going to be incredibly skeptical and try to push back and not have the course offered. And he explained, he said, don't take it personally. Don't even consider that their skepticism is real. If your course is popular as an adult ed course, it's possible that our regular students may ask for that course to be offered through social science for credit. And if we decide to offer the course, we would have to eliminate one other course that's being offered, and we would look at the ones that have low enrollment, and it would likely be these two history professors' courses. So they're doing it basically for money. And it was true. It played out exactly as he said. We still did the course. They were not happy. It never went any further than that. That's this point. Rampant Randyism. Yes, that is a good way of putting it. It's sad to me when I see people in the magic world or the academic world who say that he was their hero. I just don't understand that. I really don't understand that at all. Okay, are there multiple layers of dimension in the afterlife? I think you need to talk to the mediums about that, and then all they can do is tell you what they were told by the spirits who live there. So levels, perhaps, whatever, you hear all sorts of things about this. It's just not something we can really say. University of North Carolina at Asheville. I have not checked that out. I do have one of my students, actually former students, Darby Orcutt, teaches a class in the unexplained at North Carolina State. I know that. And there certainly are other courses around the country. And I've actually guest lectured in a few. I've even guest lectured in a couple up in Canada, all virtually, of course. So there are courses out there, but programs are a little difficult. To get a graduate program going, you would need significant financial support at the university level or from alumni to put money in to really kind of force the issue. It's come up before. And I got a lot of insight when my dad was producing for international broadcasts the Rose Bowl and the Tournament of Roses Parade. He had, back in the 90s, he had a retreat for, back then it was called the Pac-10, Pacific 10 Conference coaches. And I talked to them about that. And every one of them pretty much said, you got to come in with tons of money. And because it's not just offering courses or a program, you also have to have facilities. You're using facilities and all sorts of other stuff. Of course, they all said the same thing. If you come in with a lot of money and some of that money is being diverted to the football team or to sports, because that's the thing that brings in the most money to major universities, we would support you. So haven't found the billionaire who's willing to do that, support that kind of thing. Some people like being an Uber troll. That is true. Clearly, we see that on the internet very clearly. If you can, do you have an opinion, John Keel? I only met John Keel. I did spend some time with him at a conference in 1992. It was a conference put on in Lincoln, Nebraska. Really interesting guy. I've read a lot of his stuff over the years. He was a journalist. He knew how to tell a good story, and I think he certainly made the story of the Mothman, what people experience, he kind of parlayed that into a really good novel based on some people's experiences. But the problem here with a lot of things like the Mothman prophecies, like Mothman in general, is that you're dealing with people's subjective experiences. Unlike psychic experiences, which are purely subjective but can be proven out because you get information that you could not possibly have known, you can at least show that. Unless you know that Mothman actually exists physically, or there's some other explanation that falls into the psychic world, it's really hard to say that these were more than subjective experiences of, they can't say that they were subjective experiences of something objective, even if the stories kind of are fairly concise. It's hard to say that. So it's kind of begs the question. So then you have to make it into a good story, which certainly John Keel was a great storyteller in so many ways. So that's all I can say about him at this point. All right. Dave, you once met with people in Point Pleasant who said that Keel took a lot of creative license with Mothman reports they gave him. Yeah, he was telling a good story. Talk about creative license. Jay Anson took a huge amount of creative license with the Amityville Horror and never even went to the house. In the book The Entity by Frank DiFelitta, I talked to him after the book came out, before the movie came out, because he worked closely with Carrie Gaynor and Barry Taff on the novel. He embellished heavily to make it a really interesting novel. Yes, it's based on a true story, but like so many movies which are based on or inspired by true stories, the writer takes a lot of license in the story. I have no idea, Wesley, what you're talking about. No idea. Wesley, I'd appreciate it if you don't bring religion into this, or we're going to have to block you. All right. You're kind of in the wrong place for that. All right. Anyone else here want to bring something up? That might have kind of curtailed a little conversation here. I will tell you, if anybody's interested in really looking cross-culturally, that course that I teach in starting in May, Parapsychology and Anthropology, is an interesting course because I want to try to expose people to a lot of things I've been exposed to in my anthropology undergrad and actually since then. People have very different beliefs around their psychic experiences, and it seems like the beliefs can sometimes shape either the reporting of the experiences or even the kind of experiences that people have. All right, Ed and Lorraine Warren. I don't think much of them, honestly. Ed and Lorraine Warren, I met Ed Warren once, met Lorraine Warren many, many years later once. They had their own truth. Let's put it that way. That's a good way to put it. When I was working at the American Society for Psychical Research in the early 80s, they were active in Connecticut in the Northeast. And I got a call from a therapist who had worked with a number of people in the Connecticut area they were kind of word of mouth referring to her. And she ended up dealing with people who were traumatized by the Warrens when they came in and investigated whatever it was these people were experiencing. Because it was always a demon. And one of them, the therapist actually did her own investigation. And one of them actually said that she investigated the house and found normal explanations for everything. And then I was on a case which the Warrens had declared was demonic, and I found a normal explanation for it. So I've heard this from other people. So that's one point against them. They scared people. They generally almost always found demons. It didn't look like they looked for normal explanations, which is not the way you do an investigation. Then there was the issue where Ed often said, we don't charge a fee. And yet, I know two good examples. One, a woman called from Michigan to the JFK parapsychology program about what was going on in her house, which was sounded like genuine phenomena. And she said she had called the Warrens and she was really didn't know what to do because they were willing to come out, but they were asking her for $5,000 for expenses. And at that time, you could have flown first class and hired a limo, and you still would, and gone to the best hotel in her area, and you still wouldn't have come close to $5,000. So she turned him away, but I thought that was very disingenuous. And then there was another case in Southern California where they were involved with it, and they told, at the end, they told the people, we want to, we need to get reimbursed for our expenses. It's $5,000 again. Well, as it happens, there was a writer there embedded in the case who was kind of observing things. And by the way, the case turned out to be fraud. One family member faking out others. But I told the writer to tell the family to ask them for an accounting, an invoice, which listed the expenses. And basically to tell the Warrens it's for our accountant has asked for this, for our taxes. And when they asked for that, apparently the Warrens just turned around and left in a huff. They have promoted the whole Amityville horror thing heavily. I'm sorry to say that I don't know whether she just simply had a different mindset or was getting senile, but I saw around 2008, I saw Lorraine speaking. And at one point she started talking about the Amityville case. And she started out by saying that the president of the Parapsychological Association had asked them to investigate, which was absolutely not true. No one from the Parapsychological Association officially would have asked them. Jerry Salfin, one of my colleagues, got to know Ed Warren from another case, which was actually done pretty well. And Jerry was there at the time the Warrens were coming in. Very, very different explanation or very situation. I actually left the lecture because I didn't want to call her on it. She was too old and fragile for me to do that. So let's put it this way. I don't have a high opinion of anybody who goes in with the idea that it's always going to be demonic, doesn't look for a normal explanation, lies about what their lack of fees at $5,000 consistently is what you're asking for as expenses, and you don't want to account for that. That's, to me, a fee. That's what that is. It's okay to charge a fee, but you got to be upfront about that. Anyway, don't think much about that whole that whole thing. Just like I've had to over the years deal with people who were told by local ghost hunting groups that they had a demon in their house, when in fact sometimes it was perfectly normal, or when it was paranormal, certainly not even close to demonic. So that's my tirade. Doug, thank you. There is an experiment participating happening next week involving remote viewing. And let's see, I don't see the link. So if you want to try posting that again, feel free and do that. I have actually have that in my on my Facebook, somewhere in my Facebook posts. I have something about that as well. But you can feel free to post that link right now. In the meantime, thank you, Graveyard Grog, for getting rid of Wesley. I wonder why it was, it was inevitable that somebody was going to come on and try to do that stuff. I am not going to be in the next Paramook, the massive online course. I haven't been asked this time around. That's happening next month, but it's definitely worth checking it out since it's free. I know old ain't necessarily fragile, Susanna, but this was not the case with her. And again, I didn't know mindset-wise whether she was simply making it up, as they have done in the past, or not. Okay, Graveyard Grog, you want to let Doug post that link? I'm not sure if you're able to do that, because I know about Doug's experiment. So otherwise, maybe I can find it myself. Your phone hit the button by accident. That's all right. Let me see if I can find that. And Susanna, you might be interested to know that the experiment is taking place in Port Townsend as well. That's where the actual experiment is. So here, let's see if I can find this link. I'm assuming it's the same one I'm thinking of here. Let's try this. Hopefully that's the right one. Wow. I'm seeing Wesley's thing before it gets cut. And boy, you're a piece of work, aren't you? Thank you, Graveyard Grog. Okay. All right. So good. That's the right link. And in the meantime, I'm also going to post this link. So again, if any of you are in the Pacific Northwest and want to pop over to Seaside, Oregon on the 22nd of March, I will be there till probably lunchtime on Sunday because I got to drive back to Portland Airport and take a flight home. But I'll be busy with stuff on Friday and Saturday. There's some special events I'll be doing. Yeah, Susanna is correct. Port Townsend is absolutely full of ghosts. So Doug, you might want to explain a little bit more because Tina's asking that question about astral projection or remote viewing. It's a little bit of both, I think, from what the description is. So if anybody gets a chance to go to Port Townsend, I think Port Gamble's another one that apparently is pretty haunted too, up there in Washington State. Do you like Seaside? I have no idea. I've never been there, but I know that my friend Ankasha Menti and a couple of my former students have been there many years in a row, and they like it. So, what is your opinion on UFOs? If you see something in the sky and you don't know what it is, that's an unidentified flying object. Okay, that's the basic definition. Just to really get it out there. In college, I spent my first year at Northwestern. I was an astronomy major, actually astrophysics, and Jalen Hynek, very famous UFO person, was the head of the astronomy department. I actually volunteered at the Center for UFO Studies because he was always looking for volunteers, and read a lot of reports from all sorts of people. That was what I was volunteering. My job was to volunteer to do that. And there's some cases with really good evidence. There's clearly something flying around. The question is, what is it? And is it all, as Hynek would put it, is it all nuts and bolts hardware? He seemed to be of the opinion, like Jacques Vallée, to some extent, that not necessarily all UFOs or UAPs are actually physical objects. They might be psychic projections in some way or something else. Hynek had he was involved with a very famous case in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and deeply looked at that. There was a case where a couple of guys, a young guy and an older guy, were fishing, and a craft landed and left physical evidence. They were taken aboard the craft and examined that kind of thing and put back. Not by gray aliens. They were kind of like weird-looking robotic type beings. And there's some other really good cases that are supported by physical evidence as well. And of course, you have many UFO sightings where they've been photographed, they're video recorded, or more importantly, they're also on radar. So there's that to it. Multiple witnesses. I don't know what they are. I don't know that they're all the same thing. Maybe they're just alien teenagers buzzing the Earth for fun, cruising. I don't know. So I don't know that anybody knows here. All right. Well, how similar is Seaside to Half Moon Bay? I guess that's a question for somebody who's been to Seaside and Half Moon Bay. All right. And thank you, Doug, for those explanations. All right. Hynek was an amazing guy, great sense of humor. I will say that I got very mad as an alumni of Northwestern when it's been a few years, but I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, the Skeptical Inquirer interviewed the former dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, which Hynek was in, and said negative things about Hynek. And that bothered me a lot, considering that dean was perfectly okay having Hynek every year do the incoming freshman lecture, welcoming lecture on UFOs. Perfectly okay about that. Perfectly okay that that Northwestern was getting all this attention because of Hynek. So it just bothered me, really bothered me that that was the case. Hynek was incredibly calm. Would often say, I study not UFOs, but UFO reports and any physical evidence from those reports, because you can't study a UFO. Because if you had a UFO, it wouldn't be flying, and at that point, we'd know what it is. Maybe not where it's from. All right, yeah. Well, that alien teenagers thing, it just like occurred to me years ago. So let's face it, teenagers are crazy. All right, The Close Encounters of Man is a really good biography of Hynek, but I also recommend people read The UFO Experience by Hynek, and also The Edge of Reality, a book by J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée, if you can find copies of those. Always important. Yeah, it's going to be spring break, I know. That's why it was hard for me to get a flight there. It's going to be interesting. And Paul, I noticed you did mention that Ghostbusters is happening on March 22nd. I mentioned early on that I'm a little mad about this. I don't remember what George Carlin said about UFOs. I'm sure it was very funny, but also very, very skeptical as well. Right. There was a movie. I try to remember what was the name. There were a couple of movies back in the early '60s. One of which had Frankie Avalon, and there were like alien teenagers in that one. So. I also recommend a movie if you want to kind of go back to that weirdness. There was a movie in the early '60s called Visit to a Small Planet. It was from a play by Gore Vidal, and it starred Jerry Lewis as the alien. So good fun stuff. So anyway, we are down to the last couple of minutes. I will obviously be back in a couple of weeks. Just as a reminder, something I mentioned a few minutes ago, if you are interested in equipment in ghost hunting, I'm starting a class tomorrow night, 4 weeks, called Paranormal Tech. And we're going to take a look at not only whether any of the technology really does what it says, but more importantly, how you can use it and how best to kind of get information in the cases. All right, Carlin mentioned how humans behave and why aliens don't want to visit us. Okay, so there's one reason I thought of that aliens might want to visit us. Our entertainment, our arts. What is it about the Earth that's unique? Now, there's food, of course. This may be the only planet with chocolate. You may have seen a bumper sticker like that. But the idea of creativity, different cultures produce different creative results. Music, art, and of course, we have movies and TV shows. So there's potentially a reason. And then the other side of that is, and there was a very short-lived, might have been just a TV pilot I remember from the '70s, which had alien anthropologists observing Earth's customs. And that's even appeared in Star Trek to some extent. So studying a primitive culture is something that people do. Hynek actually mentioned that as a good reason, as a good argument against Carl Sagan's argument. Carl Sagan would say, that faster than light travel is not possible. Why would any alien race want to? First of all, that's not necessarily true, but why would any aliens want to spend years to get here to observe us? Again, for the reason that Carlin talked about. And Hynek's comment was, you go back to the 19th century, even before that, there were people studying primitive tribes, and they would actually take a sea voyage of months to get to a location. Then they would go into a mode of trying to hide and observe from being hidden, and eventually let themselves be seen so that the natives don't react in shock. It's kind of what he pointed out, that if there are extraterrestrials visiting or anyone else, it's kind of the pattern that these things have taken. So, not saying that they're aliens, but that's a really good type of thing. And the Vulcans gave us Velcro. I think I seem to remember that from Star Trek somewhere along the line. But of course, Scotty Lieutenant Montgomery Scott gave us transparent aluminum, which apparently is becoming a real thing now. And if you don't know what I'm referring to, that was in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Look it up. All right. John Cleese has been looking at the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies for years. He believes in survival. He actually moderated a panel on survival with the folks from UVA. I suggest you go and find it. I use it for one of my classes. And that's it for our time. We've gone past the hour, so time for me to have dinner. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. And we'll see you in 2 weeks on the 17th of March. Same bat time, same bat channel. Good night.